I move Notice of Motion 1091 standing in my name. Acting President, I dedicate my speech today to Murphy, who was just a baby when he was cruelly killed. Murphy was 3 months old and had only just been given his first taste of life. Like most Staffordshire pups, he was playful, he was cheeky, and he loved to be around people. But on September 25, Murphy was failed by the very people that were supposed to protect him. I want it to be on the public record that the Lost Dogs Home, an organisation that claims to care about and to shelter animals, killed Murphy. This is an organisation that states it is their vision to give animals the best chance of a happy and healthy life. On this occasion, they spectacularly failed at everything they purport to be about. But we know this is an organisation that relies on the cover of darkness to carry out their murderous and monstrous ways. The Lost Dogs Home has a long and troubled history when it comes to transparency and when it comes to accountability. For decades, animal advocates and former staff have spoken out about unnecessarily high euthanasia rates, poor rehoming practices, and a deeply entrenched culture of secrecy. In 2015, the Victorian Government launched a formal investigation into the Lost Dogs Home following concerns made by the wider community. The investigation examined high euthanasia rates, housing and accommodation of animals, identification of animals' owners, and the assessment of animals for rehoming. The findings revealed that the shelter could not adequately account for why so many cats and dogs were euthanised under its care, prompting urgent calls for improved transparency and reporting practices. These are not new issues. They are part of a systemic problem that has been allowed to continue under successive leaderships and governments with little to no reform, and it is the animals who suffer as a result. Murphy's death is not an isolated tragedy. It's the latest in a long line of failures by an organisation that has consistently refused to evolve or to take responsibility. Murphy is just one of the thousands of animals that the Lost Dogs Home deemed unworthy of being given a second chance at life, unworthy of being allowed to thrive in a loving environment. Murphy was brought to the Lost Dogs Home with his mother, brother and sister, Millie. The 4 dogs were found as strays in the Casey local government area. Now they are all dead, with the exception of Millie, who remains alive, but her whereabouts is unknown and her future is also uncertain. After arriving at the Lost Dogs Home, Murphy was placed into the loving hands of his foster carers, Elizabeth and Sean, who are in the gallery with us today. Between September 12 and September 23, Murphy experienced for the first time what it felt to be loved, to be cared for. He learned to trust people. On September 22, Elizabeth and Sean were asked to return Murphy to the Lost Dogs Home for a so-called behavioural review before his scheduled desexing on September 25. The Lost Dogs Home said this was a precaution as part of protocol for his litter. Elizabeth and Sean had nothing to worry about. They had no concerns about Murphy's behaviour and there was never any mention of euthanasia. But on that day that he was meant to be desexed, Elizabeth and Sean received a call that their boy was instead going to be put down. He, according to the Lost Dogs Home, had failed one of their outdated behavioural tests. Elizabeth and Sean, desperate, contacted me pleading for help. My office and I, on the eve of a public holiday, got immediately in touch with the Lost Dogs Home and did whatever we could to try and buy Murphy just some time. But by the time we got involved and had made inquiries, Murphy was already dead. For whatever reason, the Lost Dogs Home appeared to be so desperate to kill him that night, within hours of notifying Elizabeth and Sean. They killed him despite Elizabeth and Sean pleading for his life. They killed him despite their attempts to adopt him, and they killed him despite rehoming organisations wanting to take him in. Murphy died despite a long list of people begging for him to survive. And not only were Elizabeth and Sean's voices ignored, they were escorted out of the Lost Dogs Home building by security. The Lost Dogs Home's response to this scandal has been nothing short of disgraceful. They can barely get their story straight. First, they tried to claim that Murphy was killed because his mother exhibited signs of aggression, citing genetics. If that's the case, then why is his sister Millie still alive right now? And when it comes to Millie, the Lost Dogs Home said they are committed to, in their words, take the time required to understand her behaviour. In their most recent statement, they said animal behaviour is dynamic and context dependent. These are decisions we don't rush, they say, and that is fundamentally at odds with their handling of Murphy, his brother, and their mother. Once they realised that the excuse of genetics didn't stack up, the shelter pivoted and started claiming that Murphy exhibited so-called antisocial behaviour and high risk of developing aggression. But the Lost Dogs Home have deliberately and repeatedly failed to explain any examples at all of Murphy's behaviour in this so-called test, other than the fact that he was timid, a baby in a scary shelter environment. In fact, when my office sent a list of questions about Murphy and his testing regime to the shelter, at their own request, when they failed to answer our questions in a meeting, their acting CEO responded to say, "We won't be responding further to your queries in this regard." Let me be clear. Murphy wasn't dangerous. He was failed by a system that allows animals to be killed behind closed doors with no independent oversight, no appeal process, and no accountability. Animals are not dying in shelters like the Lost Dogs Home because there is nowhere for them to go. They are dying because of these outdated and frankly barbaric behavioural tests, which fail to take into consideration not anywhere near a reflection of a loving home. I've spoken at length about why we need to move away from these so-called tests. The Lost Dogs Home have refused to tell anyone exactly what Murphy was put through in this test. In the past, I've been told by former staff that some of them involve disgusting tactics to try and scare dogs into a reaction. It's beyond concerning that these assessments are unregulated, unverified, and impossible to challenge. Foster carers, the very people who know these animals best, are completely shut out of the decision-making process. And shelters like the Lost Dogs Home are able to continue to rely on the status quo and of silencing people to kill healthy dogs and cats for the sake of convenience under the cover of darkness and secrecy. It is time that they are stripped of their right to make life and death decisions in secret. So, Acting President, that is why today I'm calling on the government to appoint an independent oversight mechanism, such as a person within the Department of Animal Welfare Victoria, to approve all behavioural-related euthanasia decisions that are carried out at open intake shelters, just like the Lost Dogs Home. In 2023, the Lost Dogs Home put down 3,542 cats across their shelters at Cranbourne and North Melbourne. Of those, 662 were because of behavioural issues. That same year, 624 dogs were killed, including 355 for behavioural reasons. That means that more than half of the dogs killed at the Lost Dogs Home were killed because of so-called issues relating to their behaviour. It didn't get better in 2024. In fact, it got worse. 4,190 cats were killed, behaviour was the reason for 971 of those cats, including kittens. And when it comes to dogs, the Lost Dogs Home killed 1,065 in 2024 and 611 for behavioural reasons. That is a staggering and unjustifiable number. So essentially, 57% of dogs killed at the Lost Dogs Home were because they were deemed to have behaviour issues. And in all of those cases, shelter staff made that decision in secret with no pushback at all. This is why experts and advocates have been calling for an independent role, away from the organisations themselves, to have the final say on the decision to euthanise for so-called behavioural issues. Had an independent officer had the final say when Murphy was being sentenced to his death, I would be willing to bet that he would still be here today. But it is currently not a requirement to document or to even declare any information about these decisions, such as what sort of testing was taken out, what other options were explored, and whether an animal was assessed in a foster home or only in a scary pound environment. There is no accountability. There is no transparency. In fact, it is not even a requirement to have an expert behaviouralist make these decisions. My motion seeks to change that today by taking the final say out of the hands of internal shelter management with decades of poor management practices, often still using practices not supported by science or by evidence. I know we will see more animals given the chance that they deserve. By having to justify to an external and independent officer why an animal should be killed for their behaviour, we will force transparency. We will see more pounds and shelters reconsider their decisions before they make them. We will see more animals receiving treatment for conditions that should never be a death sentence, such as anxiety or timidness. We will see more animals surrendered to rescue groups who have the time and the ability to properly rehabilitate them, if they need it at all, in a more suitable setting. Acting President, the level of killing at the Lost Dogs Home is unprecedented, but it doesn't have to be this way. Because hardworking pet rehoming organisations who believe every animal is worthy of living are willing to take in some of the animals on the kill list of these pounds. In fact, for years, they have been begging for that right. As we were desperately trying to save the life of Murphy after his foster carers reached out, I put in writing to the Lost Dogs Home that night that an award-winning animal rescue, Forever Friends, was willing to take Murphy and any of his remaining family members to put them through the behavioural rehabilitation program. This is not a rare scenario. There are countless specialised pet rehoming organisations across Victoria that are willing and able to take on animals put in the too hard basket by organisations like the Lost Dogs Home and other pounds and shelters. And that is why this motion also calls on the government to make it mandatory for all open intake shelters to offer every animal set to be killed for behavioural reasons to a pool of authorised pet rehoming organisations, except in the case where an animal has been legally declared dangerous. This is something that the Lost Dogs Home will tell you that they already do, but the culture is one of silence, and most of these groups have been shut off after questioning the Lost Dogs Home decision-making capacity. And by making this change, it's not an obligation on these groups to take them in, but it does make it a possibility. It opens up another chance that previously never would have been had at all. Rescue groups are already resource stretched, but they are up for the challenge. This is a request that has come directly from them, and we should be listening, not telling them what they are not capable of. Because had it already been in place, I can guarantee that Murphy would still be alive today. It is in these smaller rescue groups where animals will truly thrive, because they will be given the time, the care and the environment to show their true temperament. Acting President, I know that even with these changes in place, there will still, sadly, be a need for some animals to be euthanised. But it is vital when that does happen, and it should only happen as an absolute last resort in extreme cases, that Pounds provide as much information as possible to justify this decision. We want to ensure that animal fate data is not only more transparent, but also outlines what steps were taken to come to that decision in the first place. Currently, the Code of Practice requires Victorian shelters and pounds to collect and report their animal fate data annually. But too often, this data is deliberately clunky and hard to interpret. We are calling on the government to tighten these deadlines so that data is reported on a quarterly basis, so we receive it more often, so that every 3 months the public, advocates, policymakers are able to get a clearer understanding of exactly what is happening inside these places and when it is happening. It will enable problems within the sector to be identified and addressed more promptly, and drive shelters to maintain higher standards through increased visibility and ongoing scrutiny. Without timely and transparent data, more lives, just like Murphy's, will be at stake. Animals will continue to be needlessly killed before the public are even aware that there is a problem. It might be too late for Murphy or the countless other dogs and cats across Victoria that shelters have deemed easier to kill than to be given a chance at life. But it's not too late for every other dog and cat that will, through no choice of their own, end up in these places in the future. And while we believe these changes will ultimately make shelters and pounds a safer place for animals, it is also up to the Lost Dogs Home to do so much needed soul searching. It's time we got a commitment from them that they are willing to change. They have lost their social licence, and it's up to them to earn it again. They are meant to be a life-saving shelter, but instead they have become a killing factory. Shame on the Lost Dogs Home for killing Murphy. Murphy was not a number. He was not a mistake. He was a life, and his life mattered. Thank you.